Okay, so let's see what we're going to do with these validation errors. Now, typically we're going to encounter validation errors when we're using forms. And typically, with those kind of errors that we get back from the server, we'd want to keep the user on the form rather than redirect them somewhere else, and a toast is not going to accommodate this number of errors either. So typically what we'd do is keep them on the form and then display a list of the validation errors so they can see what they've done wrong. And that's the way that we'll approach it inside here. So back to VS Code, and we'll open up our test error component to do this, and we'll create a class property called validation errors. And this is going to be a type of string array, and we'll give it an initial value of an empty array. And then inside our get validation error method, when we do get an error, let's just surround this in curly brackets, the console log. We'll keep the console logs, but after the console log, we'll say list.validation errors equals, and we'll just specify error. And we know that error, even though it's got a type of any, we know that's going to be a type of array. And let's use that inside the template. So we'll open up the test error component HTML, and below our buttons, then we'll use the built-in control flow. Once again, we'll add an if statement, and we're going to check for the validation errors.length and see if it's greater than 0. If it is, then we'll add some HTML inside here. So we'll create a div and give it a class of row and margin top of 5. And below this, we'll create an unordered list, and we'll give it a class of text-danger. And inside here, we're going to loop over our different errors. And once again, we'll use the Angular control flow to do this. So we'll create a for, and we'll just say error of, and then validation errors. And we'll keep the index as it's tracking, because all we have to work with is just the string in this case. We don't have an ID for any of these. So this is a good place to use the index of the array for Angular tracking purposes. And then we'll just add a list item inside here and use interpolation to display the error message. So that should be all we need to do. So let's go back to our browser, and if I test a validation error, then we see the different validation errors that are coming back from our API server. And like I say, typically we'd see this kind of validation error when we're using forms. And now we've got a standardized way of dealing with server-side validation errors, and we'll be able to use that array to keep the user on the form and display the server-side validation errors as a list, or however we want to display them when we're using forms a bit later on. So we've got a couple more to go, and next we'll take a look at what we're going to do with the 404 error.